Hi guys, Harbs here. Well, I said I was done with Baldur's Gate 3 for a while, but then Wizards of the Coast came along and dangled some bait in front of me in the form of Magic the Gathering cards, specifically Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. After going over some of them, I decided the opportunity was too good to miss, so I've been well and truly reeled in. Now, there were quite a few interesting previews on the 17th of May, and then even more intriguing ones in the days after. Some of them seem to be directly related to Baldur's Gate 3, with others possibly just linked to D&D lore in general, and then some cards seem to be referencing the original Baldur's Gate games. There will be some references to DATAMINED spoilers in this video, so please stop watching now if you don't want to know anything beyond the base early access game. And I'm also not going to read too much into what was said in the video on the 17th of May. There were what I believe to be a few mistakes made by the staff on the panel regarding the lore, and this is nothing to judge them about. D&D has a lot of settings and Wizards of the Coast own a lot of franchises, so I'm not criticizing them in that respect. I'm just saying that you should take what was said there with a pinch of salt. Okay, let's go.
You exist because we allow it.
Oh yeah, it's you who owns the franchises. Sorry, Hasbro. So I'm not big into Magic the Gathering in general. I won't be breaking down the mechanics of the cards because I'm not really confident in doing so in the slightest. I do know, however, that there are 5 main colours in Magic the Gathering: white, blue, red, black and green. And they are at the core of the game's mana system. But more importantly for this video, they all seem to represent somewhat the personalities of the organisations or individuals displayed on the cards. Now, I'm sure that the designers put cards into certain colour categories based upon rather broad stroke reasoning, because some characters are obviously complex and could fit into several of the colours. So I will talk about the colours a bit, but I'm not sure how much it actually offers us when it comes to the lore and bigger story of Baldur's Gate 3 and the Forgotten Realms. However, there are some card colours that have stood out to me that we will discuss in the video. We're going to start off with the cards relating to the main characters in Baldur's Gate 3. And by this I mean characters that can be found in the party. I'm not going to talk about every card as I said before, just the ones that perhaps offer us some insight into Baldur's Gate 3 or something just generally interesting. The Wizards of Waterdeep was already mentioned in a card that got revealed a couple of months back called Reflecting Pool. Gale stared into the pool and saw a stranger. The similarities were uncanny, but it was not him. This actually got me thinking about this scene here, where Gale is studying himself in a conjured mirror. When we ask him why he is doing this, he kind of brushes it off. However, after seeing this card, it makes me think otherwise. Is Gale seeing something when he gazes at his own reflection? In Chublot's data mining videos on the Hag's vicious mockery lines, she says this about Gale.
I can smell what's under those bandages, wizard! You're a Russian ruin.
And in the loading screen art, he does have bandages on one of his arms. When he dies, necrotic damage begins to emanate from him, and I can't help but wonder if Gale's true form, which he perhaps sees in reflections, is very different to the rather normal looking human we ourselves see. Astarion's card is something called a multicoloured card, and part of me is wondering if from a lore point of view this is down to the direction he could potentially take in Baldur's Gate 3. The 2 colours associated with his card are white and black, white being associated with traits that incorporate selflessness and black being similar to self-interest. Again, I don't think the colours are super important because bear in mind there is a white card with Bane's Invoker on it. White can also be associated with law, of which Bane as a Lord of Tyranny would embody quite well. Interestingly, in the livestream, when a lot of these cards were revealed, someone from Wizards of the Coast had this to say regarding Raphael's card being associated with Astarion. But like I said before, take it with a pinch of salt because it seems like they might be getting Raphael confused with Astarion's master, Cazador.
Raphael is another reference to Baldur's Gate 3. I believe he is the mysterious benefactor who is responsible for Astarion's affliction, we'll say. It's a little bit of a story beat that kind of winds out a little bit later. I won't get too far into spoiling it, but he is a noble that resides within Baldur's Gate, and he is very fiendish in nature. So
yeah. So this just seems like a straight up mistake. We know Cazador is hunting Astarion. He couldn't be Raphael, as Raphael just walks into their camp. However, I will point out that Astarion does have infernal scarring on his back, carved by Cazador, and we know Cazador has an infernal pact based on data mining. So could Raphael be part of Astarion's story? Well, it's possible that he is part of it indirectly, and maybe this is where the confusion came from. It looks like Will is potentially in the Burning Village where he originally made the pact with Mizora, and then I've also included Karlach and Minsk here, given that they have been data mined as potential companions. With regards to Lae'zel and Shadowheart, there's nothing major from their cards that stands out to me. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at cards whose characters appeared in the original Baldur's Gate games, as well as the enhanced editions. Bear in mind that the majority of these characters are likely dead, especially the humans. As you can see, there are a lot of them, with the likes of Volo already being in early access. I suppose one of the most interesting cards here is Faldorn, who is confirmed to be dead in Baldur's Gate 3 when we find this document. I've linked a separate video on Faldorn and the Shadow Druids down below, but she was a companion that we could meet in the Cloakwood in Baldur's Gate 1 and then in Arm in Baldur's Gate 2. Abdul Adrian is a very interesting addition here because it confirms that he is actually canon to the BG series. I assume this is in name only, as the Baldur's Gate novels, where the name originates from, have been widely considered non-canon for a long time now, considering their many discrepancies. Abdul was not mentioned in Baldur's Gate 3's prequel Descent into Avernus, but he was mentioned in the adventure called Murder in Baldur's Gate, where him and another Bhaalspawn called Vikank died in battle together, which actually reincarnated Baal. Saravok and Irenicus both have cards, and I've recently made a video on their possible return to the series, which I've linked below, although I highly doubt they'll be back in any official capacity. Jaheira's Respite, this is a really interesting card, because although she doesn't have a specific character card, the word respite is important here. This might actually be subtly referring to her role in Baldur's Gate 3. Yes, major spoiler alert, she has been data mined thanks to Chublot, and it seems like we can find her in a place called Haven, which contains an inn called Last Light. This inn seems to serve as a sort of respite against the Shadow-cursed land, which was what Ketheric Thorm unleashed upon the Western Heartlands. I could just be connecting dots that don't exist here, but it seems like Jaheira's Respite might be referring to this. It also wouldn't surprise me if we get Elminster turning up at some point. I could definitely see him just rocking up and dropping some cryptic clues and then disappearing again, like he did in the original games. Alora, Mazzy, Safana, Dynahair, Nalia, Viconia, Jan Janssen and Imoen were all companions in the previous games. Alora and Mazzy could theoretically still be alive as halflings depending on how old Alora was in BG1 and how old Mazzy was in BG2. Jan Janssen as a gnome could definitely still be alive, and I would absolutely love to see him in BG3. There is already a reference to him in the Druid Grove in the form of a turnip related fantasy involving a devil, and his plotline in Baldur's Gate 2 was very Mind Flayer orientated. Dynahair was already dead by the time of BG2, so we won't be seeing her. As Nalia and Imoen are humans, they are likely dead, but given that Imoen is a wizard now, there is some leeway there that she could still be alive. Strangely, Imoen, who was a pure thief in Baldur's Gate 1 before she dual-classed to be a mage in Baldur's Gate 2, is now a mystic trickster, which makes a lot of sense, but Nalia, who was a dual-classed mage and thief as well, is now just a rogue. As a drow, Viconia is almost definitely still alive if she hasn't been killed. The artwork for her, though, is kind of strange. She looks like a classic drow here, even if the card describes her as an apostate, of which she is from the perspective of most drow, due to her being a worshipper of Shar. I'd actually really love it if she was part of Shadowheart's Cloister of Shar worshippers in Baldur's Gate. Gorion, for those that don't know, was a foster father in Baldur's Gate 1, a very important figure in the Bhaalspawn crisis because of his work to save several young Bhaalspawn from a cult of Baal. He was killed by Saravok, Abdul Adrian's half-brother and fellow Bhaalspawn at the start of the first game. The mighty servant of Luik O is a weird one, and didn't technically feature in the original games, but it is an indirect reference to something that did. Luik O was a general originally from Oerth in the Greyhawk setting, and was originally a follower of Lum the Mad, and we can come across the machine of Lum the Mad in Watcher's Keep in Baldur's Gate 2. Now, what's more likely is that the creators of the set have added this in because it is also referenced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It states that Lum the Mad's several times over granddaughter, Lum the Maestro, is reconstructing the mighty servant. Wilson, Rasad and Nira only featured in the Enhanced Editions, and we have seen other references to the Enhanced Editions in other Wizards of the Coast products. And I've linked a video down below regarding one of my theories on how the Siege of Dragonspear could link up to Baldur's Gate 3, as Beamdog's expansion features the infiltration of a Temple of Baal by a Mind Flayer. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the villains, including Mind Flayers and the Cult of the Absolute. I'm not going to get into too many theories regarding the link between these two factions, as my regular viewers will know that could suddenly turn this already very long video into a 2-year-long rabbit hole of theory crafting, and we don't want to get into that just yet. However, I've linked some videos down below that do go into it. The latter part of this section will contain some reveals that I'd consider very spoilery regarding the main plot. Again, they're just theories regarding something that has been revealed in the cards, but it could hint at something we might find in the end game of Baldur's Gate 3, so please be aware of that before continuing. The Illithid Harvester here is interesting because it contains flavor text which reads, "Your mind belongs to the Emperor now." Gale does imply something with this line here after Lae'zel expresses her fears of an Elderbrain uniting all Illithid creeds. And Chublot has datamined an Elderbrain with a crown on its head. The dead Illithid in the Goblin camp talks of Nautiloids coming through a void in the sky, and it could be assumed that these Illithids are part of a bigger group. We've already seen them try to summon something called the Mindbreaker in the comics by Jim Zub, and perhaps there really is an Emperor in charge of these Illithids. The Cultist of the Absolute card shows some armor that was datamined a while ago. It appears like it might be someone who is high up in the cult, as we can see lots of different types of armor, and this one seems the most regal. We have come across some of this style already on Nier, and obviously the Dead 3 symbolism in general is on many of the cultists. The flavor text on this card reads, "You embrace power at any cost, and if it consumes you, so be it." This might be referencing the Tadpole powers, where we sink deeper and deeper into its corrupting nature. Note that if we use it enough, we simply become a true soul in the dialogue. This is further backed up by the fact that the cultists on the card has tentacles coming out of them, and the actual mechanics of the card talks about sacrifice, which is quite possibly associated with the cult itself in these game lines here. I've often wondered why this helmet has these kind of arrows coming off it. Does that mean anything symbolism wise? Well, maybe not, but it got me thinking about Baal's card in the set, which seems like he has daggers continuously encircling him. Anyway, we know from datamined lines and from the Mindbreaker comics that the Cult of the Absolute are infiltrating various religions and priesthoods in Baldur's Gate, and in this particular card the window looks very similar to the symbol of Lathandar. It's been datamined that the cult will attack the Githyanki Kresh, which is likely in an old temple to Lathandar called Sunrise Spire. Is this the cult in Sunrise Spire after cleaning out the Githyanki? Okay, now we've got these two Elderbrain cards. This one appears as if it is a young Elderbrain, whereas this one appears truly gigantic, and the hovering mind flares around it are slightly reminiscent of the first ever teaser trailer. Could this be the Emperor? They both appear to be underground, and this knight here might be a flaming fist, given the uniform. Potentially it's under Baldur's Gate. We know that the city is being infiltrated by mind flayers, and I couldn't think of a better base for an Elderbrain than beneath the city. At the end of the first Baldur's Gate game, we fought Saravok in a Temple of Baal, situated in the Undercity, and there isn't any mention of this place in other sources, not even in Descent into Avernus or Murder in Baldur's Gate. However, we can see it referenced in this card here, which states, "No one really knows how deep the waters go beneath the Undercity, nor what amorphous horrors lurk within." And then this basic land card says, "The sudden sinkhole was surprising enough, but nothing could have prepared you for the ancient city that was hidden underneath." The actual Undercity dungeon card even has this written on it: Throne of the Dead 3, which is potentially a huge spoiler. We know that the Dead 3 have something to do with the Mind Flayer plot, and in this card here, Baal even looks like he is crouching behind a throne. Just what on earth is going on in the Undercity? If this Elderbrain is down there alongside the Throne of the Dead 3, then it could mean one epic dungeon in Baldur's Gate 3. From other dungeon cards related to 5th edition adventures, like Dungeon of the Mad Mage, the last part of the card is referencing the name of the last chapter in that 5th edition adventure. The Morphic Pool card that we saw earlier could also be this Lost Well. Another card, the Altar of Baal, is quite aesthetically similar to the Temple of Baal from Baldur's Gate 1. Notice the arch and the hooded statues. Could this be that same temple in the Undercity? Maybe. But then again, none of this is evidence of anything, they're all just theories. By the way, I'd just like to point out how animalistic Baal looks here. Going off appearances alone, he looks like something to be unleashed. In fact, Bane has always been the more strategic one in the Dead 3. We can see this throughout Realm's lore, and in more recent times in Descent into Avernus, which is even reflected in his own cultists. It's been datamined that Baal's cultists seem to be the one doing the dirty work, and this is also the case in Descent. I assume it's still the case now that Bane is the one that is potentially running things, even if some of his time is dedicated towards his burgeoning K-pop career. Now, let's start talking about the cards directly related to Descent into Avernus and Baldur's Gate 3, except for the companions and the villains that we've just spoken about. Again, I'm only going to talk about the ones that I think could indicate something about the plot or some wider lore. First up is Alondo the Seer, and it's good to finally get a face to the name. I really like the art here, and I sometimes feel that Wizards of the Coast are going a bit too bright and colourful with very little grit, but I actually think it really fits for places like Candlekeep, which I assume is probably where Alondo is here. Troublot did datamine some lines regarding his prophecies and how they could be relevant to the companions. Let's take a listen to some of the things that Alondo's prophecy says regarding Astarion.
A prophecy about people falling from the sky. Could it really be about us? I always knew I was destined for something great. I'll leave the details to Alondo. Challenge the gods for their domain. I'd settle for getting my own brain back.
Here we have Mahadi, who is the owner of the Wandering Emporium, which traversed across Avernus in the Nine Hells. He also ran a restaurant called the Infernal Rapture. Hopefully this indicates that we will be returning to Avernus, however it could just be a plain old reference to Descent. So there isn't much to say about the Duke. His fate is revealed in early access as he's been kidnapped by the Cult of the Absolute and taken to Moonrise Towers. I think we'll be seeing a lot of him in Baldur's Gate 3 if we keep him alive. I'm sure there are options to go the opposite way, however. I'm not going to talk about Raphael here. I did a separate video with some theories on him that I've linked down below. I do love the art here though. So in this card we have Dillard Portier, Thalamra van Tamper, Ulder Ravengard and Beline Stelmane, the four dukes of Baldur's Gate. Now this is just my opinion and I don't know whether I'm just subconsciously viewing her this way because of what I know about Beline, but she seems rather subdued in both versions of the card. She is sitting looking down and has a sort of glazed expression. In Descent into Avernus, the following is written about her. Once a vigorous and formidable politician, Duke Beline Stelmane recently suffered a seizure that left her with a partially paralysed face and slowed speech. In truth, a mind flare provoked the Duke's seizure when it took mental possession of her. Now Stelmane wages a silent war against the mind flayer's influence, biding her time until she can find a way to signal for aid or regain her will. Not even Stelmane's aides are aware of her secret struggle, though they cover for her as best they can. Oh boy, Zevlor. Probably the most obvious spoiler in the set. His card shows us that there's a chance the leader of the Tiefling refugees will take a rather unexpected turn. Some of his voice lines regarding his worship of the Absolute were datamined a while ago, but many people just assumed that this was cut content. However, this card implies otherwise. The person behind the concept of Zevlor had the following to say on Twitter. Zevlor's also willing to consider any option to find a home for his people, and might be willing to make a deal with a savvy bargainer for the power to do it. We can already see some documents in-game that reference the discrimination faced by Tieflings, and so maybe Zevlor becomes desperate to combat this. Perhaps he could join the Absolute out of the pure desire to see that his people are at least free in Faerun. We can also see this book in his quarters, which might hint at his deception at playing another side. Liara is a character first introduced in Tomb of Annihilation, but she is also mentioned in Descent into Avernus. In Tomb of Annihilation, she is the commander of Fort Belurian in Chult, a Flaming Fist outpost where she is serving a tour of duty. We can see references to Tomb of Annihilation in Baldur's Gate 3 already, for example in the Harpy's Nest. In Descent into Avernus, Duke Dillard Portier, who is Liara's uncle, wants to bring his niece back to Baldur's Gate after Ulder Ravengard leaves, so that she can maintain control of the Flaming Fist in the city. Liara could therefore be who we find in charge of the Flaming Fist when we turn up to Baldur's Gate, maybe with or without Ravengard in tow. We can see her name in the game files along with someone else called Tyndall. The Dragon Cultist is rather generic, but there is a link to Descent into Avernus here, although that's not to say that this card definitely refers to that, as Dragon Cultists do appear in lots of other adventures. In Descent into Avernus, they appear at the end of the Bathhouse dungeon where the Dead 3 Cultists are based, and are there to reclaim treasure that was stolen from Tiamat and given to the Vantamper family by agents of Zariel, so that they could pay the Dead 3 Cultists to commit murders in the city. Ellen features in Descent into Avernus and is the owner of Harbs Bakery, described as a place well known for society gossip that sells sugar-bread loaves, teas and cinnamon cookies. There's an encounter in the adventure where Ellen herself can invite the players to the bakery. No doubt that if this does feature in Baldur's Gate 3, it will be a good place to pick up information on the goings on in the city. One of the backgrounds for the adventure is that of a murderer, and the following is written: "She knew," which meant tomorrow every pastry-loving patriar in Baldur's Gate would too. The upper city's most notorious gossip, Ellen Harbs of Harbs Bakery, had to be dealt with. There is also a lands card that references this bakery. Lulu is a Hollyphant that appears in Descent into Avernus and initially served as a mount in a Mastodon form to Zariel, the Archduchess of Avernus, when she was an angel. Lulu's memories of this time are hazy, and she actually has a connection to the card we saw earlier, Mahadi, who in an effort to win favour with Zariel splashed Lulu with some water from the river Styx, which caused her memories to fade. He then handed her over to Zariel. Now, Zariel apparently couldn't bear Lulu's presence, as it was perhaps a reminder of her former angelic self, and so she sent the Hollyphant to Faerun. She eventually returns to Avernus with the players in the adventure acting as a guide, where her memories will slowly start to come back. She doesn't have a bad bone in her body, and a cute model of a Hollyphant has been datamined by Chublot. Rilsa Ryle first made an appearance in Murder in Baldur's Gate, and is one of Ninefinger Keen's top lieutenants. They are both members of the Guild, a criminal organisation in Baldur's Gate, with Keen being its head. Rilsa is the kingpin of Little Kalimshan on the outskirts of the city. We can already see a reference to Ninefingers in Baldur's Gate 3 through this letter here. The guild is very well connected and have corrupted a number of high-up Patriarch families in the city. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these places cards. They seem to be separated into forest, island, mountain, plains and swamp, which I think is a pretty normal thing in Magic the Gathering. This forest card references Rilsa Rail and Hixelbark, which can be found on trees in the Cloakwood. And when it burns, it produces a lot of smoke, which is probably why Rilsa needs it for one of her many schemes in Baldur's Gate. This swamp card has been confirmed to be part of the Sewer Keep by the person behind the concept for it. The Sewer Keep in Baldur's Gate does exactly what you'd expect. It deals with the city's waste, but is also home to the Sewer Keeper's crew, who are part of the guild, using the sewers to commit burglaries and smuggle items. This mountain card here references someone called Lord Janeth, who wants to secure a mine from Null Raiders. This makes a good deal of sense considering that in Descent into Avernus, we can see that the Janeth family owns tin and copper mines. However, the Janeth family has a deeper connection to the Baldur's Gate games, as a duke known as Lady Janeth was one of the dukes that appointed Saravok to the Council of Four after his murder of Entar Silvershield. Of course, Lady Janeth didn't know about this plot at the time. It was also revealed in Siege of Dragonspear that Lady Janeth is the one who takes on Imoen as an apprentice mage. In Baldur's Gate 3, we can actually meet the runaway groom of what I assume is the daughter of the original Lady Janeth, also called Lady Janeth. This mountain card focuses on Ramesith's Tower, which is in Baldur's Gate 1 and is now run by a man called Loroakan, but I've made a separate, more detailed video on him linked down below. This plains card here references Lady Bormal. Lady Bormal claims an owlbear has been trampling her fields, but there's something unnatural about the tracks it left behind. The Bormal family are mentioned in Descent into Avernus. Bormal is related to the Bormal nobility in Arm, and has interests in southern silver mines and vineyards. This certainly looks like a vineyard here, however they are also mentioned in the upper city Gazetteer, when a distant uncle comes to visit their house in the upper city, leaving behind some items which are housed in the family crypt, followed by some then grisly murders happening shortly after throughout the city. It's implied that there is a connection between these murders and the items left in the Bormal family crypt. Of course, the Bormals are mainly based in Arm. Nadlock Burmal was a member of the Council of the Knights of the Shield there, a sinister organisation in service to the Archdevil Gargoth. They featured in Baldur's Gate 1 when Realtar, one of the higher-ups of the Iron Throne, tried to create an alliance with them. The Hune family in Baldur's Gate are current owners of the physical shield of the Hidden Lord where Gargoth is trapped, and these lines have been datamined in Baldur's Gate 3, meaning that we should at least be able to have some interaction with the Knights of the Shields. This island card here says, the ship's captain promised she'd get you safely to the Netherese ruin, but she is the one who just washed overboard. On Twitter, the person responsible for concepting the design said, the tower is a Netherese ruin on D&D's Sword Coast. The highly magical Netherese architecture warps the physics of its surroundings. Obviously, this isn't detailed on the card itself, so I do wonder whether this will have something to do with the actual game, given the connection of Netherese shadow magic to the tadpoles. Okay, let's take a look at some more miscellaneous cards. Some of these have references to other 5th edition adventures, with some potentially being relevant to Baldur's Gate 3. The Stonespeaker Crystal can be found in Out of the Abyss, and is also referenced in Baldur's Gate 3, except that there it's called a memory shard. Stonespeaker Crystals are what can be found in Graven Hollow Library, allowing the player to have visions of the past, present, or future. This Mind Flayer captain can be found in Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage. He has been imprisoned by Halistar the Mad Mage in Undermountain, within the Caverns of Ooze. Interestingly, Engathrod used to be a Mind Flayer on the planet Glyth before becoming a pirate. This hag was the midwife for Strahd's mother in Curse of Strahd. Here we have a Githzerai, but we still haven't seen any confirmation that it will be in Baldur's Gate 3. I suppose it being here doesn't really mean an awful lot given all the other references to different monsters and races in the Battle for Baldur's Gate set, but I do really hope that they appear in Baldur's Gate 3. We have already seen a reference to them once before in one of Larian's Panel from Hells. Thrakus the Butcher is actually someone who works for the Zhentarim in Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and he is responsible for chopping up bodies for them. And then finally here we have the Scion of Halaster, an obvious reference to Halaster of Undermountain, whose dungeon we navigate in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. A Scion is a kind of descendant or offshoot of something, and Halaster does have several clones, which actually can be a different gender or race, etc. to Halaster himself. They can even have different personalities, but they will have Halaster's subconscious lurking within them. This card might be referring to one of those clones, but what's really fascinating is that Gale has a line saying, I hope Halaster takes good care of Tara while I'm away, which is big news because it means that Gale knows Halaster so well that he's willing to leave his Tressym with him. Is Gale one of Halaster's apprentice, a clone, or just an acquaintance? The flavor text does make out that someone who knows Halaster well is saying it. Okay, that's all the cards I'm going to cover. Obviously I haven't spoken about every single one in existence, and we've still got some more reveals coming on the 30th and the 31st. So if there is anything really good, I'll make a video on it, but if it is just minor stuff, then I'll likely just do a few tweets about it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video then do please give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!